Hello, and welcome to this Let's Chat Storm the Castle. My name is Karen Emmons, and I'm a VASO board member, one of the technology event group leaders, and a national event supervisor. I'm accompanied today by Kyle Pine and Ian Emmons. Kyle and Ian, you want to give me a chance here, just a second, to spotlight us. There we go. Kyle is an aerospace engineer for Aurora Flight Sciences. He's also an alum of Science Olympiad, competing in this event in middle school and serving as an event supervisor for it last year. Ian, who, yes, is my husband, works for Raytheon BBN. He too is a national event supervisor, the other technology event group leader, and mentored one of our children in building for this event. Together, they bring a great knowledge to share on Storm the Castle. In our time this evening, we cannot possibly cover every event rule or situation in the rules or the VASO clarifications. Nothing we say here today supersedes a rule or clarification. You will still need to read the rules. Read the rules often, because every time you do, you'll see something else and then read them again. And don't forget about the VASO clarifications on the website, which are as binding as rules. I know that we have a number of parents on today. Please remember that Science Olympiad is a hands-on activity for students and hands-off activity for parents. Students must build all parts of the device that they bring to the tournament. But parents can and should teach tool, skill, and safety. They can help students think about what should go in a practice log and set up practice spaces to test the device. They can make test weights for the students to practice with. And please help them package it up for traveling to tournaments. It's frustrating when devices break in transit. As we get going, I encourage you to put your questions in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on them and to make sure that they get asked. Again, thank you for joining me tonight, Kyle and Ian. So Kyle, let's start off with you. What is the task of Storm the Castle?
Yeah.
You're
so
muted,
can you hear
Kyle.
me all right? Yeah,
Yes,
can you hear me now? All right, perfect. So yeah, the task for Storm the Castle is to design, build, and then test the device prior to the competition day to launch a projectile with the given counterweights at a target that, and you only get to use the energy that's supplied from that falling counterweight. So while the rules never specifically state a trebuchet is the device that you're looking for, that's the common name for these types of devices. There are other types of devices out there. So if you want to do the research and come up with a different option, then you're welcome to do so. But the trebuchet is by far the most common device we see at competition day. And there's many different types of trebuchets. We'll get into a couple of them later. But ultimately, you're free to kind of do your own research and find the best one that you think will meet the rules and do the best in the competition.
Okay, so let's start off with just a general idea how it's very useful, I think, before we even talk about building. What are we trying to get it to do? How is the event scored?
Yeah, so the scoring is really what you want to base your design on. So you want to see what the scoring is telling you is the most important thing. So with the to get your score, it's a combination of your best two shots for one of your best two for the light counterweight, and then another best of two shots for your heavy counterweight. So you have a total of 4, and the best two from the first, or best one from the first two, and the best one from the second two count towards your total score. And then those are combined with your chart score, which is laid out in very detailed manner in the rules. And so your that combination of those three things, your light launch score, your heavy launch score, and your chart score, make up the entirety of your total score that is used to rank the teams.
All right, so 2 shots with the light launch and 2 shots with a heavy launch. Do they? So what are they shooting at? What is this what's the target? The
Yeah,
event
so the
supervisor. Are
target,
we shooting at you, Kyle?
no, definitely not at me,
Me.
hopefully. That would be going backwards. But yeah, so the target is a 5 gallon bucket. And so when you do the first two shots for your light counterweight, you get to select how far you want that bucket to be. And so you'll usually use the testing that you've done to determine how far you think your device will shoot that projectile. And then so you have two shots at that distance and counterweight. And then after those two, you get to reselect your distance for the heavy counterweight and the tennis ball projectile. And then we take the best score from both of those two distances to get your total launch score.
All right. So the students will choose where to put the target for each of the two weight common to the two trials, we'll call it. So let's talk about the
Correct.
detail of the scoring. Exactly how is so you have a light launch score and a heavy launch score. So how is a launch score calculated?
Yeah, so the launch score is a combination of two or a couple things. It's the specific formula is that you take your target distance, which is what you set based on the testing that you've done. You subtract 3 times the distance away from the target that you end up shooting your projectile, and then if you're able to actually hit the bucket or get it actually inside of the bucket, there's an additional bonus for that. That is, 15% of your target distance for hitting the bucket, and then 30% of the target distance for getting it actually inside of the bucket.
Nice. Does it have to stay inside the bucket, or can it hop out?
No, as long as it hits inside the bucket and bounces off the bottom, that counts.
Okay. All right. So accuracy is really important because it's the target distance minus 3 times how far you are off, right?
Correct. Yeah. So you need to be pretty, it's more important to be close than it is to throw far. But it's kind of that balancing act where it's great if you can throw far distances, but you really want to be consistently getting close to the distance that you expect, or you think the target distance that you set. You want to make sure you're also getting consistently close results to that distance.
And you can't ever score less than 0. You can't be so far away from it that the target distance minus 3 times your accuracy gives you a negative score, right?
Correct. Yeah. If you're too far away where you might the formula would end up negative, it caps off at a 0 as the minimum.
How is the target distance measured? So when you're giving the distance, what you're going to be the event supervisor, you go to the student, you say, okay, where do you want me to put the bucket? Where are you measuring the distance from and to?
Yeah. So I think we'll show a diagram that might
Oh,
clear it up
okay.
a little bit later, but we are measuring from the very front of the launch area where your device will be to the very center point of the bucket.
So the
So
middle inside of the bucket. Okay.
exactly. Yep.
Now, is the accuracy measured also to the middle spot of the bucket?
No, so the accuracy score is actually to the closest point of the bucket. So it's to the edge, not to the center.
Okay, great. Great. That's really useful information. Any questions do we have on how the event is scored? Any additional things that I've missed? Okay, so let's go on. And we're going to show some diagrams about the launch space and the weights and things like that. But before we do that, let's just a quick overview, Kyle, of the changes that we have this year.
Yeah, so the changes from last year to this year, if you competed last year or are looking at last year's designs as kind of a starting point, this year we actually have a larger volume that the device can take up. So I think last year it was about a 65 centimeter cube. Now we're looking at a meter by meter up to 70 centimeters tall. So we have a little bit more room to play with there. And we also have a larger counterweight to go along with that. So at regionals last year, the counterweight was a bit smaller. So we have a larger counterweights this year at regionals. And then at nationals, the ranges are pretty similar, or states and nationals, the ranges are pretty similar. But at the regional level, the counterweights will be a bit heavier this year.
So
And all that is,
it sounds
sorry.
like these devices are going to throw further this year.
Yes, especially at regionals, we'll have heavier counterweights, which usually lead to larger distances.
Okay. So yeah, so Vaso needs to get a bigger space for throwing. What else? What else do we have? There were, I think, a few other maybe changes about that are different from last year.
Yeah, so one additional thing on the weights, since we just talked about that, was the last year the weights had hooks instead of eyes. So this year we actually have eyes for the weights. So that's a change that you need to make sure your device will is able to accommodate an eye hook on the counterweight as opposed to a hook. And
Actually, so
then
what we're
yeah,
we're talking about the weights a lot. Let's hop a little bit
yeah,
ahead in our outline and show the picture. If you would share your screen, Kyle,
sure.
because
Yep,
people are asking questions about the weights. Let's
yep.
just go ahead and take a look at them.
Sure thing. All right, let me know when you
Now,
guys can.
this exhibit that Kyle is about to show you is on the Vaso Storm the Castle webpage. All right. So, what do you want to tell us about
Yeah.
these
All
weights?
right. So the pictures here are showing what the regional tournament weights will look like. So at the top here is our light weight counterweight, and then the bottom here is our heavy counterweight. So you can see the difference now with the eye opening as opposed to the hook. So that's what I was talking about there, where you need to make sure your device can interface with that this year as opposed to a hook. And then up here we have kind of the new the counterweights for the regional level is 1 kilogram for the light and 2 kilograms for the heavy. And then at nationals, the range, I believe the range for the lower counterweight or the lighter counterweight is the same as last year, but the heavier counterweight is a little bit of a larger upper number there. So the regional number is pretty much is kind of more in the middle of the range as opposed to at the bottom of the range as it was last year. So
I'm also seeing it looks to me, I know that some people last year had trouble that they had that the size of the weights is the same. So they have to be able to accommodate a mass that the mass that fits into a 15 centimeter cube, right? That's the third
yes.
point there.
Yep, that's a very good thing to highlight is even though these are the weights that we are showing you, we're not providing the exact dimensions of these because they may change for states and nationals. But the major number here that we're looking at is the 15 centimeter cube. So if you're able to accommodate a counterweight of that size, you will always be able to accommodate the counterweights at the state, regional, or even national level.
Great. And also on this, I'm also seeing as I look at this exhibit, it's also saying which ball goes with which one too, right?
Correct. So there's a specific combination for the light and the heavy configuration. So with the light counterweight, you're always going to be using the standard unmodified racquetball, and then with the heavy counterweight, you're always going to be using a standard unmodified tennis ball.
Great. So that's really helpful. Again, this exhibit's on the VASO website. Does anybody have any questions about the weights? Okay. So that's good and useful, important information. I think we even still had a couple of other changes from last year that were important.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
one has to
So
do with
so
construction. What happens if you have a construction violation? So you
Yeah,
want to talk
so
about that,
this
Kyle?
year, now that we're going back to a little bit more of a normal competition schedule, we're able to do the we have the impound in the morning, and then when you come to compete, there if your device does not meet all of the construction parameters that are laid out in the rules, you will have an opportunity to you will be told obviously if there is a construction violation, and you'll have an opportunity to fix that during your competition time. if you are able to correct that issue, you are able to compete, and the score that you get will just have a zero point 0.7 modifier that is applied to it as a bit of a penalty there. And then if you do have a construction violation that you are unable to fix during that time, you still may be allowed to compete as long as there's no safety issues or concerns that are associated with that violation. But even no matter how your device performs, you're still the score, the ranking of your score will be placed behind all of the teams that satisfy all those construction parameters or were able to fix that construction parameter. So even though there's not, specifically in the rules the word tier, it does create kind of a tiered approach to the ranking where everyone who meets the construction parameters and the rules will be ranked first.
Okay. So does everybody understand that? And you can see the importance then of making sure your construction is right on. Construction parameters are hard to, a construction mistake, which would be something like not being able to accommodate the weights or being too big, you're not going to be able to fix that readily. Construction parameters can't be fixed really easily in this event, right? So you don't want to be ranked behind everybody else. If you have a construction error, even if you hit that bucket twice and get it in there rock solid and have a beautiful score, you will still score behind everybody else who did not have a construction problem. So does everybody understand that? Okay, I'm going to assume that we do. We'll keep moving on. Any other pieces that I'm missing on this front about how things are different, Kyle?
Yeah, so the only other difference that I wanted to highlight is that the design logs this year are not, they may or may not be returned to the teams after competition. So I think last year they the teams kept them with them they took them with them after competing. But this year we may not be able to do that. So when you do come into competition, make sure you either are submitting a hard copy of it or have a copy saved so that you don't lose those. So that's not your only copy, because you will need those kind of for multiple tournaments if you're doing an invitational, or if you move on to states, you want to make sure you have that.
Okay, great, thank you. All right. So now we're going to why don't we turn now to just construction parameters? And I'm going to turn over to Ian now. So let's talk about what are the size parameters and so forth. Ian, can you?
Yeah. So the overall dimensions, and again, all this is in the rules, but the overall dimensions of your device, it may be no higher than 70 centimeters, and then it must be a maximum of 1 meter long and 1 meter wide. And this is measured in what we call the ready to launch position. So that means pointed in the right direction, and that means that you don't get to take advantage of diagonal placement in the 1 meter by 1 meter box. And there's a couple of other little nits there. So one is that the counterweight must be inside the limit. So that 1 meter by 1 meter by 0.7 meters includes the counterweight hanging on the device. So yeah, and then we had a question in the chat there: how big can the arm of the trebuchet be? There is no specific limit on the size of the arm. It's just that however big that arm is, the whole device has to fit within the 1 meter by 1 meter by 0.7 meter box.
So what I'm hearing you say, Ian, then is that the trebuchet, as you launch it, has that long arm that's hanging, it's down
Right.
like this, and then after it launches, it may be taller than 0.7 meters.
Correct.
And
Right.
that's okay. It's just that when it's ready to go, it can't be taller than the 0.7
Right.
meters.
That's what we mean by in the ready to launch position. Now, the when the after it launches, the arm usually ends up sticking straight up. So you'll probably be higher than the 0.7 meters, and that's okay. But after it launches, the device must return to the 1 meter by 1 meter box in the horizontal dimensions. So again, during the launch, it can go outside that box, but it has to return to that box after the launch.
So we're really talking again about the arm. The base is not walking outside of the box, right? It's just that the arm may swing up.
It could. The base could move. There's nothing that prevents that, but if it does, it has to move back into the box.
Okay.
Okay.
But usually we're talking about the arm, and the arm swings out like this, maybe goes in front of the box,
right,
and then comes back up here after it's tossed the ball.
Right. Exactly.
And we have some videos too, so we'll show exactly how that works.
Yeah, we'll show that in a minute.
Okay.
Okay, so that's dimensions. There are a number of other construction parameters. No electricity is allowed, so that means no laser sighting. No electricity in any form, even if it's not powering the launch. You must accommodate the counterweights and projectiles that are provided by the event supervisor. So you don't get to bring your own counterweights or your own balls. You have to use the ones we supply. And so you'll want to look carefully in the rules about the parameters there. The projectiles are easy. The projectiles have to be a tennis ball and a racquetball, and those are just standard. So if it works, if your device works for your tennis ball and your racquetball, it'll work for ours too. The weights are the harder thing, and there we go back to that 15 centimeter cube maximum size on the weights that Kyle talked about a moment ago. So the launch force may come only from the falling mass, from the falling counterweight. And there's a number of consequences of this, and it's kind of confusing. And we're going to do a little demo to demonstrate exactly what this means in a minute. So we'll come back to that. Your device must not damage or alter the floor. So this is a little detail that it's easy to mess up. You could have a base where there's like screws sticking through the bottom or something, and then you would end up scratching the floor. So just put some feet on your device, like rubber feet or felt feet or Teflon feet. These are easily purchased at a hardware store and just nailed into the bottom, and then you'll be sure not to damage the floor. And your device must have a trigger that must extend 75 centimeters beyond the launch area. And this is another place that's a little bit tricky. That's 75 centimeters beyond the launch area is not the same thing as a 75 centimeter long string. So I'm going to actually show a diagram for that. I just have to find the right window to share. So this is the event page for Storm the Castle, and we've got a storm launch area diagram here. So this is a diagram of the launch area looking down at it from above. The gray box here is meant to represent the trebuchet. The dotted line is the 1 meter by 1 meter limit on the size of that trebuchet. And then the next box out from that is a 1.5 meter square, which is the launch area itself. And then around that is another 75 centimeter buffer. And the students must stand outside of that biggest rectangle when launching. And so this is the key thing to realize, is that if the student is out here and the trebuchet is in there, that trigger string has to reach that whole way, and that's a lot more than just this 75 centimeter gap here. So make sure that you have a trigger string that really is long enough. That's a key mistake that people make.
So it would need to be, what, 1.5 meters even?
Or two. I mean,
Potentially.
string is, just cut
String's
it long,
cheap.
right?
Okay.
String is cheap, right? So that's our review of the construction parameters. Although we're going to come back to revisit the issue about the force coming only from the falling counterweight in just a moment. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about a few different types of counterweights. A few different types of trebuchets. Probably the easiest one to build is one that's called a fixed counterweight trebuchet. This has the sort of the standard lever arm and the sling on the long end, and then on the short end, the counterweight is just fixed on the end there. This is not the most efficient. It turns out that a swinging counterweight, where the counterweight hangs a little bit below the arm on an extension there, is surprisingly much more efficient. And so I'm going to show a video of that. And again, I have to find the right window to share. Okay, so this trebuchet is from a number of years ago, and you're actually going to see two views of it, one from the back and one from the side. So, and it's in slow motion, so you can actually see the sling releasing the counterweight or releasing the projectile there. Okay, so I'm just gonna back this up. Sorry, I have to find the right spot. So you can see here there's the main arm. The sling is down in this track down in the bottom here, and then the counterweight is hanging down from this extension here, and that's what we mean by the swinging counterweight. It provides a surprising additional amount of efficiency to the device.
So actually, can you go back to it, Ian? Don't stop sharing. So I noticed a couple of interesting things about this launch.
Yeah.
So I can see how, first of all, I can see how the counterweight hangs out a little bit in front of the trebuchet. So this is why we have to make sure that the trebuchet is not so big as that the size of it is going to be measured with the counterweight on it. So just a reminder to people, because you can see it hangs out. But as we saw it launch, I noticed two things. The first is that the arm, so we did see that whole motion where the arm went in front of the device and then came back to a standing up straight position because the weight pulled it back up straight.
Right.
So this is what we were saying, where it might extend outside it, but then it comes back into that box. But I also noticed that the sling released a string.
Yes, that's actually an interesting point. Let me try and capture the. So you can see here the sling has two strings, one from each side of the sling. One of those strings attaches to the arm in a permanent fashion, and that's right here. The other one is actually has just a loop that is hooked over a pin. You can just see the pin right there. And the idea is that as the weight swings around, that will unhook from the pin in order to release the projectile. So you'll see that in the next second here. And then the one string remains attached and the other one just flies free.
Okay. Well, definitely the string definitely goes in front of the device, but it comes back in too. So as we finish it up,
right,
when it's all said and done, it all comes back.
and it'll all hang straight down. It takes
all
it a
hang
minute
straight.
because we're in slow mo.
Yes. Okay. Thanks.
So so that's a sort of a classic catapult design, straight out of medieval times. Another design of for a catapult or for a trebuchet is what's called a floating arm trebuchet, and I have a video to show that also. The difference with a floating arm in the classic design, the pivot of the arm is a fixed pivot, and it just stays in one spot, and the arm pivots around it. In the floating arm trebuchet, that pivot actually moves horizontally at the same time that the arm is pivoting around, and it turns out to be a good bit more efficient. So let's see what that looks like. It's a little hard to describe. It's really something you just have to see. So before I actually start the video, this diagonal piece of wood here is the arm, and the counterweight is this weight here, and the counterweight is going to go straight down. It doesn't swing in an arc, it goes straight down. And that is actually the source of the efficiency. And then these wheels here will contact this track, and they will slide back and forth even as the arm pivots around them. So watch how that works. And then he's going to do it again in slow-mo. And you can see the pin on the end here that the sling came unhooked from.
The entire sling came off, so that would be a problem, because now part of it didn't return back to the box.
that is correct. This one would not be quite legal by our rules. So
it strikes me as I look at this that it would be, I mean, this is an interesting challenge to build. It could be built legally, but again, it has to accommodate the event supervisor weights, which must be a bit more of a challenge as I look at this construction.
yes, it would be. So that's a challenge to the folks out there that want to build one like this.
Okay.
All right. So those the classic trebuchet with the swinging counterweight and the floating arm trebuchet, those are far and away the most common designs that we see in Science Olympiad. There are others. There's a notion of a flywheel trebuchet and one called a walking arm, and there's probably even others. They're much less common, and they are harder to build in a way that complies with Science Olympiad rules. So I'm not going to bother trying to cover those here, just out of the concern of time. The next topic that I want to move on to is talking about this rule that says that the launch force comes only from the falling mass or the falling counterweight. And that rule, this rule goes on to say the device without the counterweight and projectile must not contribute energy to the launch. And that is confusing to a lot of people. What exactly does that mean? And so I actually recorded a little demonstration of what that means that I want to share now. One especially confusing part of the rules in Storm the Castle is Rule 3D, the energy rule, where it says the launch force must be entirely supplied by the gravitational potential energy from the supervisor-provided falling counterweights. And it goes on to say, the device without the counterweight and projectile must not contribute energy to the launch. What does all that mean? Well, I'm going to do a short little demonstration here that will make it really pretty clear what that means. When you bring your trebuchet to be tested at a tournament, the event supervisor, as part of the check-in process, will ask you to do what I'm about to show you. They'll ask you to set it up with this. I've got the sling all put together, but with no projectile in the sling. And I'm gonna put it down in ready to launch position, and I have no counterweight over here either. And this is the key thing. You'll notice that with no counterweight and no projectile, the arm of the trebuchet just sits there. And that is exactly what that rule is asking for. It's asking that this arm does not move on its own. Now, if you imagine that one of the pieces of this arm, like maybe this piece over here, was a good bit heavier, and I'm going to simulate that by taping a weight to it, then we would have a different situation. As you'll see in a moment here. Okay, so I've taped a weight here to simulate this piece being much heavier. And now if I just let go, what happens is the arm of the trebuchet pops up by itself. And what that means is that the device, with no counterweight and no projectile, the device is contributing energy to a launch. That's what the rule says you must not do. Okay, so I guess is that clear to folks what that means? Hopefully so. There is a link on the event page to a document from National Science Olympiad that discusses this rule in some detail. It does actually get at a couple of extra details, so it's probably worth looking at that. There is an extra little bit to assessing this rule for a floating arm trebuchet, which is basically saying that the axis of the arm cannot roll downhill on the track, because that would also be another way of having the device contribute energy to the launch. But you can read about that in their document. They make it really quite clear there. Okay, so next we want to move on and talk about construction tips. And I'm not going to go into a tremendous amount of detail or give you a tutorial here, but there's a number of things that you should be aware of that you should spend a little bit of time thinking about. So one of them is choosing dimensions, and we already had that question earlier about how long can the arm of the trebuchet be? You're going to want to do a little bit of research, because there are actually some rules of thumb that apply to the different sizes, or particularly the ratios of sizes of pieces of the trebuchet. So, for instance, the ratio of the long end of the arm to the short end of the arm, what should that be? The length of the sling compared to the length of the long arm. The length of the counterweight swing arm also matters.
By that, do you mean that piece that was hanging down?
Yes, that the counterweight hung from in the classic design. The floating arm doesn't have that piece, but and so you're going to want to do a little bit of research in choosing all of these dimensions. There are, as I said, there are some rules of thumb to help you narrow down the number of choices. And then, there's also the size of the base to consider. You're going to have to kind of choose the size of the mechanism, and then you're going to have to choose the size of the base to suit that as well. Now, one handy way to help out with this is to use a simulator, where you can put in the dimensions, all the relevant dimensions into a program on the internet, and it will simulate the launch and show you how far it can throw. And we've actually got on the event page, we've got a link to one such simulator. I think we're going to put a second one on there after the talk, because Kyle found another good one. And I'm not going to go into that in a great detail, but we found these to be really helpful, because you can try out many designs without having to build anything and get a sense of how you want it to be before you start building. So that's a very helpful.
I want to reiterate that, having been around for our son's participation in this event as well too, that these do take a while to put together, to construct. It's not like building a bridge where you break it and you put another one together in a week and you break it again and whatnot. And so our kids, that we were mentoring in the event, they used this simulator. They spent a goodly amount of time with the simulator and played with all these parameters about how long should the arm be, how long should that piece down be, how high, and all of this to maximize it, so that when they really got around to building it, it was a good solid design, so that instead of trying to experiment with it in building. So
yeah, so there's a number of other things that you should plan to spend a little bit of time on. One of them is the sling, which is surprisingly tricky to construct properly and very important. Small changes in the way the sling is created will have a big effect on whether it releases the ball at the right time. And so you should, plan to actually make a few different slings before you get it right.
Kyle, you smiled when Ian said sling. Are you having a memory of when you participated and trying to get your sling right?
Yeah, I was just thinking that's one thing that the simulator doesn't quite help you with. And that's something that, we will kind of play around with, try a couple different designs and try to figure out which one works the best. But yeah, that's definitely a tricky part of it that takes a few tries, like Ian said.
I remember our son making several slings. The first one held the ball too tight, and the ball didn't want to come out of it. Right. So then, okay, so it's got to be a little bit more open. And so what are slings often made out of, gentlemen?
So our son sewed one out of cloth, and that worked pretty well. Kyle, I think you did one out of paper. Is that right?
Out of like a kind of a mesh, like kind of like your athletic shorts type of material.
Oh, yes. Right. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things you can use.
Okay.
So that's the sling. Another really critical aspect of this is that pin that I was talking about earlier on the end of the arm, where you hook the one end of the sling over it. It turns out that the angle of that pin is a strong determinant of when in the swing the sling releases, and so depending on the angle of the pin, you can get a release that goes straight up or even backwards, or you can get a release that goes almost straight out the front and has no arc to it, or the in between, which is the ideal, that goes forward but with a significant arc to it, so you get the maximum distance. And so you'll want to be experimenting with that angle, and actually making it adjustable is really helpful.
Well, we saw
Another,
that too, because you don't know how necessarily how high the ceiling is, where you're going to be competing with it. So knowing how your pin angle, what adjustments make that, you might need to go for the line drive, or maybe you get more arc space if it's got a tall ceiling. But
right.
that adjustable pin and making it be that way means you don't have to keep building that part of your device too. So, because
Right.
that is very fiddly, I remember.
Yeah, another thing to pay a little bit of attention to is the bearing of the arm, the the thing that the arm swings around. You want that to have a low friction, and so thinking a little bit about how you're going to build that so that it has low friction is important. And it's oftentimes useful to have a sort of a track in the base of the device that the sling and the projectile slide along until they get whipped around in the arc. That kind of helps that sling to always slide straight and to slide with little friction. So that's another thing to pay attention to.
Okay. Anything to add to that, Kyle?
I think I'll just re-highlight the pin, and being able to kind of adjust that on the fly. That's one of the few things during the competition day that you can actually kind of adjust to maybe try to go a little farther or go a little shorter to hit your target. So that's one thing to, if you can make it adjustable, that really helps. So whether that's bringing a protractor and bending something to where you need it to, or figuring out another way to make it adjustable, that can really help you out down the line.
It requires a lot more testing, but understanding that part of your
Yes.
device well will really pay dividends.
Yeah.
Kyle, where do people go wrong in the building, or not even just the building? Where could people go
Yeah.
wrong in this event?
So one of the big things as the event supervisor I was seeing in the past year was the charts being either not complete or not meeting every single one of the items in the rules, and those are points just as much as the launch score. So those are just as valuable in your final ranking. So making sure you have good charts that meet all the items in the rules is definitely a big one. And then some other issues that kind of go along with that is just not having enough time, like not building it early enough to have enough time to do all the testing that you need for the charts. Typically, if you are able to make all of the charts that you need, you're usually in a pretty good spot for knowing how far your device is going to throw, and really getting that consistent performance out of your device.
And
I
also
would
for being able to troubleshoot on the fly.
Yes. Yep, exactly.
I would suggest though, this is actually, I remember as a parent that it was a bit of a challenge to find places to practice, right? So if you can reserve your gym space, if you practice on a carpet, it's going to behave differently than if you practice you practice on a smooth surface. We're not going to run this event on a carpet. But I can remember, I remember renting space in the church fellowship hall even, and, just creatively trying to find spaces. And if you can't always find really long ones, figure out how your device is going to operate with the pin and the short, or just prepare now for finding space to practice, because that can be a challenge in this event. What else?
Yeah, I think we touched on it on some of the tips there, but the sling, again, just harping on that is really, that's going to take a little bit of time to try to get that right. And then another thing that kind of is more focused on the competition day is the launch area that there's a diagram up on the website that Ian kind of walked us through. The launch area is larger than what your device needs to be by about, half a meter. So during the day of the launch, you can move your device inside of that footprint if you need to. If you're throwing a little bit too long, you can move it back, assuming you're not too far. As long as you're inside that space, you have that opportunity to kind of help you get closer to it with your second shot when you're inside that launch area.
Could we bring that diagram up again one more time?
Sure.
Ian, you have it?
I got it.
Yeah, so he's kind of showing the trebuchet there with the grayed out box, and then the dotted line, that's the size limit that we're going to kind of, when you bring your device in, we'll check it in and make sure that it fits within that box before to see if there's any construction violations. And then as soon as that's checked, you are now free to move your trebuchet anywhere inside that 1.5 meter square launch area. So, yep, exactly. So you don't have to shoot all the way at the front line. Obviously, that gets you a little bit further distance, but if you're kind of in between distances for your target, you can move that around inside the box there.
Okay. I do see a couple questions coming. We'll come back to those questions in a minute. So, and anything else in the list of the ways that people go wrong?
Yeah, I think I know Ian mentioned it earlier with this trigger, the string for the trigger. A lot of people read 75 centimeter distance and made a 75 centimeter string, and there was people that had to hold on the string with just their fingertips so that they were just outside the launch area. So like they said, make it much longer than you need. Extra string's not going to hurt. And then the last thing is the weights. So not being able to accommodate the weights can be a big issue. So make sure that you have enough space for it and you have the right type of connection so you can place the weight on there without an issue.
Okay. So one of the questions that we've got right now is, can we change the arm for the light? So have a different arm for the light and a different arm for the heavy weight.
Ian, do you want to take that
I
one?
could actually answer that.
Or if you want to take that one.
I know the answer to that one, because this was an issue that was raised last year, and Nationals addressed it and wrote clarifications for it last year. And that counts as 2 devices. You are only allowed to impound and utilize 1 device. So you may not change your arm in between the light and the heavy. Okay. Somebody is asking about how would we make a trajectory chart for the design log? We don't really want to spend a lot of time talking about, we're trying to focus on building these devices, but the design log is well laid out in the rules about what goes in it. But
yeah,
if
so
I were
one thing I'll point out on that is in the design log section of the rules. It has some of the specifics as to what you need to include on there. And then if you look down in the scoring section, it also has a walkthrough of what the point values for each section are. And so it kind of covers it from two sides. So make sure you read both of those to fully understand what you need. But it should give you a good idea of what we're looking for in those. So.
Well, and essentially, it's all information you need, right? So you're not trying to make up any
Yes.
weird information. You know, you want to know at different counterweights, how far does it throw? At different ping angles, how far does it throw? Right. So, you know, so things like counterweight, pin angle, whatever, those are your independent variables. In your
Maybe
dependent
different
variables,
slings.
different slings, and then how far does it throw? So those are essentially the kinds of things that you're trying to measure and get good information for yourself, that our event supervisor will be looking at. We've discussed a little bit about what happens on tournament day. You had already mentioned that we do have impound. So at impound, you turn your device and your login, right? You don't get to touch it again until it's time to compete. You want what has to be impounded? I'm not even totally sure in this event.
Yeah, so your impound is going to be your launch device and your design log, which is going to, you know, be your not only your charts, but also some diagrams and a list of materials that you used and all that stuff in section 4 of the rules. And then when you come back for the competition to compete during your time slot, that's where you want to make sure you're bringing your safety goggles, and then any tools, supplies, or writing utensils, or a calculator that you need.
An extra copy of your chart so you can figure out how to.
Yep, that would be a great thing to do. Yeah, and then at that point we'll run through and kind of go through the construction checks. We'll notify of any construction violations and give you the opportunity to correct that. And then as soon as we get through that, we'll run through the competition where you have 8 minutes to do all 4 of your shots, 2 at the light counterweight and then 2 at the heavy counterweight.
Okay.
One thing that I will emphasize there, you mentioned goggles, but goggles are quite important in this event.
Yes.
That the arm of the trebuchet swings around really fast, and it's got a sharp pin on the end. So you really want to be using goggles even in practice.
Well, and that string, you know, as one end of the sling lets loose, it can whip around and be. This is why there's so much space required, why you have to stand so far back during launching it.
Right.
Any other mistakes that people make as they do after they do their shot? What happens then?
Yeah, so after each shot, you'll I think, you know, the trebuchet, once you get it loaded into the configuration, it's kind of a loaded item that can shoot a projectile. So we need to be very careful about the students not running out after their shot, in case, you know, the arm's still swinging or we're trying to go do our measurements and stuff like that. Luckily with this, we give you all the projectiles you need, and we have all the counterweights right there for you. So you will never need to go fetch a projectile. So you don't need to run out after that. One of the big things on this one then is not reloading your device until the event supervisor tells you that it's safe to do so. It allows us time to take our measurement and get out of the way, so we're not in a target area with a loaded device ready to go that you may inadvertently pull the pin on. So usually that goes very quickly and is not an issue, but it's just one of those things to kind of keep an eye out for.
Yes, Kyle is not the target.
Yes.
So, and we don't, so and the time stops, right? Their competition time stops while you take the measurement. So they don't need to be fretting if it takes you a little extra long time to take the
So
measurement, right?
I'm pretty sure that it does, it is included. It's a running clock from start to finish,
Oh, is it?
but
Okay.
we've never had an issue where that causes any problems.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I
So,
didn't realize that.
yes.
Um,
If for some reason we do take a long time to either move something or set up a device, and it's kind of our fault that we're running a little bit long, we'll make sure that you
adjust.
get, and we'll add the stoppage time on as needed. But we've never had an issue with that, so I don't expect that to be much of an issue. And the whole time I'm keeping track of the time. I'm telling the students, as we go, hey, you have 6 minutes left. Hey, you have 4 minutes left. Hey, you have 2 minutes left. So usually they're well aware of how much time they got.
Great. Okay. Do we have any final questions as we conclude tonight? I don't see any. Kyle, Ian, thank you so very much for this very helpful introduction to these devices and what to think about, the changes this year. One, from each of you, if you had one highlight, what would be your pro tip for the night?
Just double checked on the rules, and I do want to correct something I just said. Is the measurement time is actually not that. I wonder if that's a change, but it is not included in the allotted time. So before we close, just double check and confirm that.
So that's good.
Yes.
I'm just looking for any final words of wisdom.
I read your rules many
Yes.
times over the course of the season. It will pay off. I realize it's not the funnest thing to do, but it will pay off.
All right. Make sure you understand, I have 2 pro tips. Make sure you understand that energy rule. And there's 2 links on our website about that. And make sure your string's long enough. All right. Well, again,
Yes.
thank you all very much. And thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Have a good night, everyone. We look forward to seeing you at competition.